And you've been hearing him take this on head on, as Kate emphasized, now adding the word virtual ahead of obliteration. Zach Cohen is also with us in Washington. But Kristen, let me begin with you with what we're learning in these early hours of the morning so far.
Yeah, Aaron, I think what's really interesting about this is you're hearing President Trump acknowledge that this intelligence does exist, but he's saying that they're waiting for a fuller picture here. Now, in the same conversation, the same kind of press conference that ended up being a back and forth with reporters, he compared using the nuclear or using the bombs on Iran as the same way the U.S. used the nuclear bomb in Japan on World War II, saying they both ended wars. And then he completely reiterated this idea that he believes that they set Iran's nuclear program back more than a decade. Take a listen.
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again. I just don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to take their oil, they're going to have some missiles, and they'll have some defense. I think they've had it. I mean, they just went through hell. I think they've had it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming. And if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there.
Now, as Kate said, he's talking there about moving the uranium out. He's insisting that Iran never moved it out from underground before we struck those nuclear facilities. And just quickly, because we are here at NATO, we're going to see the president again. He's going to have a bilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is going to be notable. We're going to wait to see what comes out of that. Just a reminder, Zelensky, Ukrainians had hoped to meet with President Trump at the G7, but President Trump left early. So this will be that opportunity for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristen, thank you so much. And now, Zach, as promised, I know that we have that breaking news on the intelligence report, the first to come out. What is your new reporting on what that leaked intelligence report says, as I know you're learning more here in these early hours?
Yeah, Aaron, it's really important to know that this is the first known U.S. intelligence assessment since those strikes on those three nuclear facilities in Iran. And while it is an early initial assessment, it comes after Donald Trump, the president, has been claiming for days that those strikes obliterated their targets. And this assessment seems to be at odds with that conclusion by the president. We're told by our sources that the assessment does say that the strikes do not appear to have destroyed key components of Iran's nuclear program. That includes centrifuges and the stockpile of enriched uranium at these sites. And that's something, again, that Donald Trump has suggested unequivocally was destroyed. And now we're seeing subsequent our reporting kind of recontextualize a little bit here. But take a listen to what Donald Trump said earlier when he was asked about this intelligence assessment and our reporting on it.
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take that we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration. And you'd think that a media outlet would say, isn't that a great thing? I mean, more importantly for the pilots, for the military, you take their guts out. You take their absolute guts out. They had a tremendous attack. It was a complete obliteration.
So there are still a lot of questions. And again, this is a very early assessment, but it is a formal one from a U.S. intelligence agency, albeit one, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is not representative of the entire intelligence community's view. But it is a specific agency that has experts who are focused on analyzing battle damage assessments like the one that's being carried out on those strikes in Iran. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, this does point back to comments made by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, earlier this week when he said it's far too early to know what is still there and what is not.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they admit they don't know where so much of that enriched uranium is. Some of that uranium highly enriched, and how much of it was moved possibly before the strikes or to unknown locations. So much that we don't yet know. Kristen at the NATO summit, Zach Cohen, thanks so much to both of you.
So tell me a little bit about the significance of this intel moment, because to me it seems like everything rests on this. the moves from Israel or the U.S.?
Well, everything we see from Donald Trump from day one when he took that escalator ride was, as we're talking about legislatively, big and beautiful. So we have a big, beautiful bill that's in front of the House and the Senate right now. He's talking right now about big, beautiful bombs, which is why he's talking about things like obliteration. And what we see in initial assessments may be true, may not be true, but they certainly contradict what Donald Trump has said. It's why he's angry about it. But ultimately, so much of what we do in politics and unfortunately foreign affairs is the basketball game is over. What happened and what does it mean moving forward in the next round of the playoffs? I think we need to take our time and wait and see what happened and what it means both here and obviously in Iran and in Israel.
Joel, I want to ask you about an op-ed actually written by the former Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who served under President Biden. And he was writing this, that the strike on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities by the U.S. was unwise and unnecessary. Now that it's done, I very much hope it succeeded. Now that is a question mark in some ways,
right,
or
yes.
rather, what does it mean to succeed is a question mark. Can
Yeah,
you talk about how to think about this now?
Sure, Audie. So a couple of things. First of all, success is whether or not Iran's nuclear program has been fully set back and leads to, I believe, verifiable, strong negotiations that conclude this chapter of the Iran-U.S. Battle over the future of, frankly, these weapons of mass destruction. But for Secretary Blinken, what he was making the point is that there are high risks involved. And we're seeing it now in the discussion about the intelligence. But I do think, and I agree with Doug on this, let's wait to see what the full intelligence community assessment is. One leak from 1 out of 16 intelligence agencies is not definitive.
Say that again. One leak.
One leak out of 16 intelligence agencies is not definitive.
So you're listening for more?
I'm listening for
Do
more.
Do you trust what you hear if the president cast doubt on the intelligence that he's been hearing?
I trust the intelligence community's full assessment more than anything. I think that President Trump is probably continuing to make and articulate an argument that, quite frankly, makes a lot of sense. But until we have the full data, we don't know. And it's also very important to point out that we do not have full information either prior to these strikes. So to assume that there's some computer out there that's going to spit out the exact answer, that's unrealistic.
NBC's Courtney Cubie from the Pentagon. And Courtney, we heard from the defense secretary who also brought up this intelligence report that was leaked, saying that it was a low confidence report, meaning that there's low confidence in the data in that report because it was perhaps a little bit dated and that nobody's been on the ground and that the evidence is under the rubble. And yet, wouldn't that also indicate that when we hear from the administration, their assessment that everything was obliterated is also on shaky ground and is not certain?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So they're basically trying to have it both ways here. It's that this, again, it's a U.S. government product that found that there was likely destruction that was done to at least Fordo that set it back a number of months, up 3 to 6 months. It did not find that the nuclear program was destroyed altogether. But then we have the president who's citing other intelligence agencies and other countries saying, oh, well, it was destroyed, so they must be right because it fit the narrative. I mean, Anna, if the president hadn't come out that first day and said that the program had been obliterated, something that was repeated even again today, if they hadn't said, he and those around him hadn't continued to say that the program wasn't obliterated, this may not be such a dispute. It may just be, this is an early assessment. And I think we should call it that. This is a very early, preliminary assessment. President Trump even said that more information had already come in. We expect more information will continue to come in. But that does not change the fact that this first assessment found what it did. One thing I completely agree with Kevin that it is absolutely striking that the president has been so open about Iran telegraphing that they were going to target a base in Qatar that houses U.S. troops that has not only thousands of Americans there, but also millions and millions of dollars in American hardware there. It's the biggest base housing Americans in the entire region. The fact that he acknowledged that Iran gave the U.S. a heads up, but then also essentially said, yeah, OK, we'll get everyone out of there and then you guys can carry out your attack. That's a remarkable acknowledgement that we just heard from him in a very casual way. But I'm also struck by the fact that when asked about this classified assessment, rather than say we're not going to talk about a classified intelligence community product, instead the initial reaction is just to attack the media about it. So they are essentially confirming the conclusions of this assessment
because they're talking about something that, again, is classified. It's several remarkable and very unusual things that we don't normally hear out of the President of the United States here, Anna.
Ambassador Dalder, I'm wondering what kind of a curveball this whole Iran situation was, and all this talk about what intelligence to believe is for the NATO summit.
Well, in some ways, it was a nice curveball because it withdrew attention, which what many European leaders, including the NATO Secretary General, were worried about from the repeated statements by President Trump that he was thinking about perhaps withdrawing from NATO or leaving. Even as he was flying to the summit, he said there are multiple definitions of what Article 5 means, implying that somehow the ironclad guarantee that an attack against one is an attack against all is something that can be called into question. So while Iran overshadowed the summit, it allowed the actual NATO business to move forward in the way that European leaders had planned and hoped, which is to get the President of the United States to come to the summit to reaffirm that America will remain engaged in NATO, to give him and allow him to claim a win on more defense spending, which is something he has pressed for. Of course, one of the reasons we have more defense spending is because the United States under Donald Trump is called into question whether the United States will continue to defend Europe. He has called Ukraine a European issue. He refused to say that Vladimir Putin is a threat or an adversary, even when he was asked during the press conference. So there are major differences between Europe and the United States.
Trump is getting iced out. You've been seeing it through a lot of these negotiations because people don't fully trust him. Now, I want to make it clear that we need to see more, and that Mark Carney has still been bending the knee too much to Trump. And I know a lot of liberal voters who watch this don't want to hear that reality. But while it is important he's making connections beyond the United States, that's good to see. A lot of the new military spending that Canada is going to do is going right into the coffers of American war companies, basically. Military companies. Companies that love the Republican status quo. And don't forget, Carney and other people are helping to whitewash Trump's Iran lies, saying, oh, he did it because of the WMDs, when there's no credible evidence that they exist. So justifying Trump's rationale, which when countries with good reputations in the world like Canada help Trump lie, well, then it gives him more credibility. People don't trust Trump, but they do trust Canada, right? And so there is this tension here. Canada is sort of saying to the U.S., look, we're icing you out a little bit. The traditional relationship is banished in a sense, but in other ways, we're going to bend the knee. And so I do think this awkward position sort of leaves everyone confused. It leaves Trump confused, although when is he ever clear-minded, right? But it also leaves a lot of citizens confused about what exactly is going on. You know, Carney backing the Iranian narrative on the one hand, very much knee bent guys for Trump, right? But on the other hand, making military deals sort of outside of the North American corridor, that is interesting. So Trump has to worry that he's getting pushed to the door.